Revelation 10. And it's page 1274. And this is what has happened. We've seen that all these judgments are coming. We know how the world is going. We don't have to look around and panic and wonder how the world is going to end. We see it. There's going to be judgment on evil. All wrongs are going to be made right. And we who have believed in the blood and the life of Jesus Christ are going to find that he was truly worth it all. And that we want to live our lives in light of his coming. That we will see him, we will know him. And we want to position ourselves for persecutions. We want to position ourselves to know that this is for every nation. And this is the blessings and the judgments are for all nations, all people. And that it comes down to the very specifics of who we are. Okay, so here we go. John says, I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. This is Revelation 10, surrounded by a cloud. Some people believe this is indeed an angel, just like it says, but just like in the Old Testament, sometimes it says that it's an angel and it sounds just like Jesus. And we believe from the Old Testament, it would be Jesus. I personally believe this is probably Jesus, but you can decide whether it's an angel because it says angel. I would support you in that. But it's like if it hops around and it has two ears and it's around Easter, you're kind of thinking that's an Easter bunny, you know. And so this description is hard to get away from to believe it is not Jesus himself. Okay, so either way you want to go, but no matter what, this is a heavenly, powerful, God-ordained angel or Jesus. I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, surrounded by a cloud with a rainbow over his head, like at the throne of God. His face shone like the sun, and his feet were like pillars of fire. And in his hand was a small scroll that had been opened. Remember, we've already looked at this big scroll that had the 7 seals. This is a scroll that has been opened. It's small. And he stood with his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And that's if you're going to underline something today, that's a big one. This is one who has triumphed, who is over the sea and the land. He is over all things. And he has the scroll in his hand. These other scrolls are going to tell everything that we've looked at. The scroll that was in the hand of God, that Jesus was the only one worthy to take. That scroll told of the judgments that were to come in great detail to the end of the earth. It is well with our souls because it is within the hands and the sovereignty of God. There is judgment coming, no question. And there is great life, eternal life. And we want to live our lives saying, Jesus, I want to know you. I know the end of the story. I will not be shaken. And even if our lives are taken, no one can take away from us what God has done. So he is standing with his right foot on the sea, his left foot on the land. He is over all, over every detail. He's over the sea and he's over the land. He has the whole world under his authority. Okay? That should bring great stability to us. He is over. He is El Elyon. He is above all. He is the Lord above, way above all. Anything that you're concerned about today, it is underneath that sovereignty. And in fact, it says that we bring thoughts captive in anything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, above that knowledge. We bring that down and we hold that captive and say, Lord, you are sovereign. My stability is here. He has one foot on the right foot on the sea, his left foot on the land, and he gave a great shout like the roar of a lion. And when he shouted, the 7 thunders answered. You know, these 7 seals, 7 trumpets. Now, you're not going to get lost with the details of the 7 thunders, because once he hears it, he's getting ready to write it down. He sees it all the 7 thunders, and Jesus says to him, or the angel says to him, whichever, and says, don't write that down. And so it's like, okay, so what was that? Why that? Why did you let him see that? And then say, no, we're not going to tell everybody that right now. It's because we are not going to know all things. There are things that will happen that we will not know until they happen. And there are things that we are not to know. But God will reveal what he wants us to know, and he will withhold what he doesn't. But in all these things, God is working. There are times in your life when it looks like he's not doing anything. This is just the way it is. It's the way it's always going to be. But to know that God is working. He is always working. We have a tendency to say, oh yeah, and God's really working now. It's not like he was not working and suddenly started working. it's suddenly you started seeing what was going on, and things were changing quickly that had been in motion that whole time. Okay? And it says, and when he shouted, the seven thunders answered. When the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, keep secret what the seven thunders said, and do not write it down. Don't let them know of the workings for this. Then the angel I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand toward heaven. He swore an oath in the name of the one who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and everything in them, the earth and everything in it, and the sea and everything in it. In other words, he is swearing to this God, and it's in your notes for you to study this week, the different scriptures that say, because God cannot swear by anything greater than himself, he swears by himself. We are not to swear because we can't control the things, the things that are going to come. I can't swear to you that we're going to meet next week, because I can't control that. But God can make those oaths because he knows he's God and able to fulfill whatever promise he has made to you. And he is faithful. He's over everything, and he is able to say, there will be no delay. When the seventh angel blows his trumpet, so we've had 6 trumpets, and then these thunders that we don't know about, and now we're here to the 7th trumpet. God's mysterious plan will be fulfilled. It will happen just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Everything that has even been recorded from the prophets on it, there is a time that everything is going to be fulfilled. Every wrong will be righted, if that's a word, and everything the faith will be seen and will be recompensed to us, that we will be able to live and to accept the promises of God and his life forever. Then the voice from heaven spoke to me and said, go ahead, open the scroll from the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. You remember before, Jesus was the only one worthy to take that scroll. But now he's saying, John, you go take this scroll. There's one he's over all things, symbolizing this is God who is over all things, and he has a word for you. Take this scroll. Go take this open scroll. Take this and open the scroll. Go take the open scroll from the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea. You don't have to open it. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the small scroll. Can you see, John? I mean, this is all a vision, just like, would you give me that scroll? You know, just, I mean, what? Yes, take it and eat it. Now, that's surely not what he's expecting, right? Eat this thing. It's like, that's what you do when you're in a car and you've got something you're not supposed to have and the police are behind you. That's when you eat that stuff. This is where he's saying, no, take this scroll, take this word and eat it. And you would think, well, it would be gone. That we think of it as we eat because we don't want to see it anymore. Take it, eat it, he said. It will be sweet as honey in your mouth, but it will turn sour in your stomach. So I took the small scroll from the hand of the angel and I ate it. It was sweet in my mouth, but when I swallowed it, it turned sour in my stomach. And then I was told, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. This is for the whole world. Do not believe that this is about America, that this is about the things right here. Judgment is coming and redemption is coming. Jesus is coming for every tribe, every people, every nation. So he says, but what he is showing here is so many times God will equip us by what we take in. It was sweet to his mouth because it was the word of the Lord, but the words that he is going to speak, they're bitter. And so, but he had to take those in before he could then give them out. And God wants us, he will put us in situations that he's sovereign over your individual life, and those circumstances that have come will prepare you specifically for the things that are in the future. He says, you must prophesy the kings. Let the fire flashes from their mouth. And let's see, verse 11. Then I was told you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. Okay, and so, and so he's saying this is going to be for all people. It is a big, big plan and a purpose of God, and yet it is very individual. There are corporate plans that will happen, and even though we don't know all those, no matter how much we study, no matter how much we love the Lord, we're not going to know all those things. But I think the reason that it's in here is for God to say, I do know. I do know, and you can trust me, and that we would find ourselves leaning into him more and more in that which we don't understand in order to say, God, but you have my hand and I want to follow you. Okay, so Lisa, if you'll come, I would like for you to meet my new little friend. I could spend 15 minutes telling you our story, but it's fascinating, and I know, and it's because of y'all. I'm convinced that our relationship and what he has done that just will defy everything. I met her at Jimmy John's, and had to fight. Yeah, do you remember that? Yeah, and so that's where I met her, and then it just keeps Kroger, and we just kept weaving, and then it's just like. Then she lives next door to Mark and Molly Campbell, and that's another whole story, and just over and over. And then she has become someone that I respect, and I'm grateful for you. I've told you over and over. But anyway, this is Lisa Reasons. Can y'all say Lisa Reasons? She's going to use this mic too, okay? Lisa Reasons. Will you say hi, Lisa Reasons?
Hi, Lisa Reasons.
Okay, here we go. This is your left ear. Your other left.
My other left ear.
Pocket or in the back, okay? Sure. Is that good?
All right, I'll have to stick in my pocket.
Perfect. And she can go till 10 or 10:15, and if she wants to stop by, either one.
Okay.
Okay, and so then y'all can ask her questions afterward or before 10:15, depending on when she stops. Is that good? You good?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you all for letting me come. Thank you, Miss Debbie. I've never been called a big fish before, but I'm gonna take that as a good thing. I'm also not used to speaking in front of people, so I have just asked the Lord to speak through me. Interesting, everything that you said this morning was exact. I mean, it's everything. Like every single thing that has led me to the point that I'm at with birth choice and the adoption agency. It is every single detail of my life that has prepared me for this. And it's not just, and let me say, when I started, I knew nothing about starting an adoption agency because the adoption agency was not in place. I started January 20th. The adoption agency was not in place. It was not a thing yet. Nor did, even though I'm adopted and my son's adopted, nor did I know how to do domestic adoptions. But the cool thing about God is all those things I could learn, it was all the other stuff of what God is doing in this adoption agency that God has been preparing my entire life for. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with birth choice, but that's one thing I've noticed since I've been there in the past couple of months is everything that they do, everyone that's there, their provisions in every sense, it is purely, you see the providence of God over and over and over in everything that they do. And with that agency, we will be the 6th pro-life crisis pregnancy center that is also an adoption agency in the nation. And so that's really cool. There's been a lot of, probably through the decades, a lot of negative stigma with adoption. There's been plenty of people, I think, that have been greedy in adoptions or have done them for the wrong reasons. And so, the fight is not only with that, but within birth choice. You've got on one side the lie that abortion is better and easier than adoption. And that's what the enemy would like people to think, that in that moment, when those women are in a state of fear, as we all do in a state of fear, we look inward. And so they look inward and they think this is a quick fix to this. And but there's so many wonderful people there. And so the lie on the other side is that adoption, and this is within the church, a lot of times, not always, but sometimes with well-meaning people, that it's a means to an end. And we want to take away both of those lies. we know that it's, abortion's not better, but it's also not a means to an end. It's, everybody has a part in this. There's so many parts, and it's a calling. You know, the cool thing is I get to look at people and say, you have to be called to this, and encourage them to not try to choose what they think they want, or what gender, or whatever, but allow the Lord to lead in it. Because when we try to do it, when I try to do things, I mess them up. When we try to do things, we mess them up. And so, allowing the Lord to lead in it. And so, I was in the chronological Bible study, but I haven't been able to go the past several weeks with everything going on. And so, I didn't even know what chapter y'all were in. But I have to read. I brought my regular Bible. And I have to read, when I turn to Revelation, the end of Revelation 11, when I was looking at this, I have to read what was in the Bible, what I had written 8 years ago. And just as you were reading, like, the 7 years, that's one thing that, for the longest time, when I look at dates, or I look at, like, sequences of years, or even addresses, like, I'm always, like, looking at the biblical meaning of those numbers, because God is in every single detail. And so, I have some things written in here. I wrote January 2017, which is exactly 8 years before I started. 8 means new beginning. Anyway, so this is what I wrote. And I didn't read this until I was sitting there. But it says, all I need for being mighty in my generation is faith and the word of God. Through Jesus Christ, I can do absolutely, unequivocally, absolutely unequivocally do anything God places before me. This includes, among other things, getting that stinking enemy off my promised land. And then under it, I wrote, share your testimony. And then I wrote, pray big prayers and share your testimony. And then, just as with, and how great thou art, I think what the line is, an awesome wonder. And at the top it says, part of it's kind of worn, I can barely read it. It's something about the wonders from God. You no longer call them wonderful without the wonders from God. And I think God always just sits readily when to give those. And in Revelations 12:11, how many times I've referenced this verse, they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives, even unto death. So many times through the years I've paraphrased that verse, and it's through the word of the testimony, by the blood of the Lamb. People can argue with whether or not they believe Jesus is who he really says he is, and what he really did, but nobody can argue with your testimony. That's personal. Nobody can ever say you haven't been through that and that you haven't experienced Jesus. So the conquering is through the word of your testimony and the blood of the Lamb. But anyway, so the end of, actually it was November, Thanksgiving Day. Holidays are really hard because I don't really have family, and so I had so many times through the years, like, overcompensated on holidays, just cooking like crazy and trying to do everything for my kids. I have 4 kids. And so it was like the end of the day on Thanksgiving, I was just like, just really struggling. And for the longest time, I'd been praying, like, just begging God, just show me what I need to be doing. A few years ago, I'd gone back to graduate school after I'd gone through a divorce. And it's interesting, like, someone asked me to come work for a judge in Brownsville, and it was only because of that I ended up going back to graduate school, even though I didn't stay in that job long. And then I went back to graduate school, and I started doing sex abuse therapy. But I realized I couldn't take care of my own kids doing that job. God had purposes even in that. It's just amazing. But anyway, stepped away from that, opened a business. Once I got that up and going, I was just begging and pleading with God to show me what it is I need to be doing. And back, at least probably 17 years ago, and not necessarily because I was adopted or because I had adopted, God began this just major stirring in my heart regarding adoption. And how he did all of that started many as a teenager. with things that I experienced, but God just started the stirring, and oftentimes, and this is how I was, when God began that stirring and just this deep passion for adoption and those without someone, and pro-life was included in that, but I knew my focus was on those that had no one. I just thought, this is something God's doing now. And so I had done some things with it, but it wasn't going anywhere. And what I realize now is it wasn't the right time. God was beginning that stirring, but so many more things had to occur before God used all of those things. And it was a lot more suffering after that. But just the perfection of everything, just like you mentioned, when we don't see God working. I mean, it just has blown my mind that now I'm in a place where I get to offer this hope and healing, not just to the baby, not just to the adopted family, but it's just as much about that expectant mother, the birth mother. It's equally everyone in that adoption triad, but I get to offer that hope and healing now. And but so all those years ago, God was starting this stirring, and then several years after that, my marriage is falling apart. I go through a divorce, and things get even more difficult after that, and things occur. Have you ever gone through things and you just think, how in the world did I end up here? But then on the back end, you're like, oh my goodness, God used all of those terrible things, not caused them, but allowed them because of, all the sin in the world and in us, for us to heal from things. And you sometimes are not aware of things until you go through these things, and you have to be aware of them in order to heal from them. It's just crazy. But post-divorce, I've stepped away from doing sex abuse therapy, and I'm just get the business going, just want to take care of my kids and still have time and all that. And so, but I'm begging and pleading with God about what I need to be doing. And never, ever, ever did I think that passion for those without someone or adoption, I never thought that God would ever bring that around. I just thought it was a lost thing. Like I had done something to miss it. God was never going to use it. God was never going to use me again for that. It was something I had done that it wasn't going to happen. And so, last Thanksgiving, by the end of the day, I was really struggling. And so, and I'm months and months into just begging and pleading with God, and I refuse to just go choose what I need to do. There would be days where I would think, I'll just go back to doing therapy, and I'm like, no, God, I'm waiting on you. Like, I desperately need to know what it is you need me to do. And so, in those months leading up to that, there was a point where God deposited in my mind lobbying for kids without anyone. And I thought, nobody pays anybody to do that. Like, how do you can't just go find a job like that. And so, and then a little while later it goes by, and I think, in the social work world, it's either there's micro when you're doing therapy, so like small one-on-one, and then there's macro, which is like large, working with a lot of things. And one day God deposited and was like, I'm not micro, I'm macro. I'm the visionary, the big picture. And then I'm like, you can't just go online and apply and look for jobs that are macro, lobbying. You just can't do that. And so it's not like going to look for therapy. You can go on LinkedIn and there's plenty of them. And so just kept waiting. And so this Thanksgiving Day, another difficult day, and that evening I sat down, was exhausted, and exhausted. I get on Facebook, I'm scrolling, and comforting thing in that is, so often you hear, don't get on social media, open this. And yes, you do need to open this. But even in being exhausted and opening my phone and getting on social media, I saw a post seen thousands of times, and it was from Brent Lambert. And I had been friends with him on Facebook, even though we really didn't know each other. And had read the post before, didn't think anything about it. And I was reading that post, and just for whatever reason, I felt this strong impression that I needed to reach out to him. I thought, that is really weird, because never was pro-choice on my radar. I mean, I've always been pro-life, but I'm just like, my focus is on the kids that are here, not the unborn. And so, that's just really odd. And so, the very next day, the pro-choice mailer comes in the mail. I was like, huh. So I looked through it, I don't really see anything. 2 days later, I'm at church, which I had started going to fellowship church the end of September. And I will tell you, side note, when I started going there, and this is not anything against any other churches, it's just about being where you know you're supposed to be. And I knew that this is where God had called me to be at this specific time. Because from that very first Sunday, it was like stepping into fast-moving waters. And every single week, there was something or someone that God was just leading and guiding and connecting dots, and one of which was Miss Debbie. And so, which that wasn't even on a Sunday, I don't think, but just amazing. But so a couple days after that, I'm sitting in church, and this is just I hadn't been there very long, and God brought my attention to this little girl out in the hall, like in the middle of the aisle. It's during worship time, and she's dancing, and it's obvious she's adopted. And I was like, huh, God's not brought my attention to adoption in a long time, and I'm just like, it's just confirmation of where I need to be. And then 2 days after that, it was December 2nd, I just thought, I'm just gonna message Brent on Facebook, so I don't have his phone number. So I sent him a message, and I said, hey, I feel impressed to reach out to you. I don't know what it means. I'm an MSW. I'm adopted. My son's adopted. I've done therapy for a little bit, but just for whatever it's worth, I just felt like I need to share that with you. And there was an article written, we did an interview with Jackson Post, and in that, some of the things were a little confused, but the gist of it is there. But it stated that I was seeking, or it seemed to kind of seem like I was wanting something more. Like, I didn't know, like, I was in a position where if he was like, sure, come sweep our floors, then I'll come sweep your floors. Like, that's how desperate I was to just be where God wanted me to be. And so he answered like 10 minutes later and said, interesting, I'm intrigued. Let's talk this week. And I was like, I wonder what that's about. So I go that Wednesday and come in, and he's like, just tell me about, about you, what you're thinking. And I'm sitting there, one of the things I say is, well, back when I was in undergrad years ago, I was one of two pro-life people, and social work can be pretty liberal. And what I kept hearing over and over and over again is, why should we be pro-life if we see all these kids languishing in foster care? They go into foster care to get help, and there are some good foster care, but mostly overall languishing, getting abused in foster care, kids that even if they're with their families are not really taken care of, and that problem is not really something that is impossible to do, and it's not the world that's supposed to do it. It's we, the church, are the ones that are supposed to, to take care of these. It's not the state, it's not the government. We, the church, are the ones that are supposed to take care of that. And so, and I said, when we kept having these discussions over and over in undergrad, I just listened, and that's where that God started this stirring with adoption and those without someone, and just that overwhelming burden that it's us. We're the ones that are supposed to do something. And we are the ones that are supposed to take away that argument of pro-life. It's up to us. And not by saying we're pro-life, but by doing something. We each have a part. It doesn't matter our age. It doesn't matter where we are, what we have, what we're doing. We each have a part. And it may be simply praying, and it could be something more. But I explained this to him, and I said, it doesn't make sense that I'm here because my focus is on the kids that are here. even though I'm pro-life, my focus is on the kids that are here, so this doesn't make sense to me. And he said, you don't know what we're doing? I said, I don't. And he said, no one's told you. I said, no. And because at that time, it was only the board that knew. And so he said, well, we're starting an adoption agency. I started laughing. So I thought, no way. And so then he went on to explain that over the past year, that he felt there was more they could do. And if anyone was at the banquet or, oh, and I've got some impressors. They call them impressors, like you were there. These booklets that tell, and I've got to run out to my car before it's over. And I would love for y'all to take these back to your pastors and just say, pray about what we need to do. What was I saying? So a year ago, he felt like there was more that we could do. And this is what I was about to say, is Birth Choice actually started, is what they shared at the banquet. Birth Choice actually started because he and his wife were going through the adoption process and realized there were no babies and the long wait for babies because of abortion. And so that's how he was led into the fight against abortion and how it all came about. So it's a full circle moment. A year ago, he feels there's more they can do, and so he brought it for the board, and y'all gave permission to begin seeking fact-finding information and you know, just seeing what all it entails. And so he came back and they gave permission to go forward with it. So just at the point when I reached out to him, they were at the very point where the very next step was they needed an MSW to direct it and to start everything that was needed to become an agency. So he's like, this is crazy, and I'm like, this is crazy. And so we meet a few more times, and then the board approves. And I thought initially I would start earlier in January, but when they finally met, and he's like, just start January 20th, and I start thinking about it, and I mean, when I start, like, I'm handed some papers that were printed off from the state of this is what we need, but you know, you don't know what that means. You're like, I don't even know how to get this stuff. We've submitted like over 100 pages since then to the state. We're real close to getting our licensure, but now we have to figure out how to actually do the adoptions. But anyway, God's good. He's done all this. That's a piece of cake. But so January 20th, and I'm thinking about that date, and I thought, oh my goodness, like January 20th, 33 years ago, was the last day I saw my dad. So I was adopted. As an infant, I was in foster care, and I was in foster care for 9 months. It's just, so much of this is just the cool preparation that God's done for this. In my early 20s, Tennessee was like maybe the 5th or 6th state to open records, and I would go to Nashville in these courtrooms and listen to these people argue whether or not we should have our records. And it was just so weird to listen to these people argue for our information. And they had put a pawn up, an adoption agency in Nashville, saying, if you open these records, people are not going to adopt. Well, that's a lie. And so, you know, completely overlooking the fact that it's our information. Anyway, records were open. Appeal was filed. It ended up going to Tennessee Supreme Court that we should have our records. And so in my early 20s, I was able to meet my biological or maternal side. It was only 2 years ago that I met paternal side. Whole crazy story with all that too. God's in every detail. Never underestimate God's providence and what He does. Just amazing. But so with the adoptions, with the agency, everything will range from openness to fully open, depending on the situation. And the cool thing is that we get to navigate that with them and mediate that. And so the families will send in updates, a certain amount of updates and pictures throughout the process. And if the mother says, I'm not ready for them, we save them. She calls and like, hey, I'm ready to look at the pictures, receive updates. We give them, and if they want to meet, we set up those visits and we navigate that with them. So, you know, just doing the adoptions is not the only thing. Like, we're there for the long haul. And I know from my biological mother, it broke her. Like the terminology that we will use, we won't use give up. It's an adoption plan, choosing an adoption plan, choosing adoption. Because this is just as much about her hope and healing as it is for everyone else. And so, but with my own story, my biological mother was forced to give me up. She was forced, and it broke her. And she still is not okay from that. So with these mothers, one thing, it's often not talked about, the pain and everything that they go through if they have an abortion. So that lie is kind of there, that you can have the abortion, it's going to go away, and that's a lie, but you do this and it's going to be, really difficult. But anyway, we're there through the whole process. So I was a baby, I was placed in foster care, and when I received those records in my 20s, I was able to read through all the notes from the social workers, and it was in the beginning, oh, she's a beautiful baby, and then it went on to state, well, we're telling them to pick her up, but every time we come, she's in her crib, she just lays there. Well, it went on for 9 months. I just laid there, and no one picked me up. And the first year of life is very, very important for bonding. And then in the 70s, there was no information, Empowered to Connect, or Dr. Carol Purvis, or any of those things to teach about attachment disorders and how you handle all of that stuff. And so just the sheer fact that I have any sense I'm standing here is just pure proof of God's grace and mercy and goodness. But anyway, there was a point when I was in foster care where the social worker came and said, I think I need to take her to a doctor because she may have brain damage, because my head was so severely flat. And so it was a doctor in Jackson that she took me to, and I got to read his statement in there that said, do not place her with anyone that expects much because I fear she has brain damage. And so when it would list couples that would come look at me and didn't want me because they feared, they didn't know what was wrong with me. And so my parents had waited so long, they were older, like, we don't care, we'll take her. And so that's how I ended up in Brownsville and grew up in Brownsville. But the cool thing about that is, fast forward 36 years later, we're in the adoption process with my son. And this is why I want to encourage every family is don't choose just let God lead, but we're in the adoption process with my son. And if we're all honest, we all probably have some sort of people group or something that we are least comfortable with. And so for me, it was Asian. I just thought, if we're going to adopt, if the Lord leads internationally, probably Africa or something, I don't know. And so, of course, that's how God gets you through those things, is he brought us to Asia, and my son's from South Korea. But so he was a waiting child, and he too had referral after referral after referral broken. At first, he could only be adopted in Arizona and California. But when they realized they could not find a placement for him because his diagnosis was so serious that they were going to have to open up to all of America to find him a placement. And so when we were presented with him, he had a form of epilepsy that the effects from it were pretty severe, supposed to be anyway. And so my oldest daughter at the time had epilepsy, and so we had direct contact with doctors, pediatric neurologists at Vanderbilt. That's not something you just go get an appointment for. Normally that would take referrals and months to get in. And so we're presented with him, and I'm like, well, I can't say no, but I can't say yes yet. I gotta let God confirm it. And so we took 6 months, prayed about it, and within those 6 months, God confirmed it. One of which, the things that God used is he's in foster care, and no one wants him because they fear he has brain damage. You can't make that up. So 36 years earlier, when I was in foster care and they feared I had brain damage, God had my son in mind. And so had I gone in and chosen, I would have missed that and all the miracles that God's done with him. And so when we get to the end of the 6 months, we didn't talk to our social worker during that whole time, and so, the night before, we're like, okay, it's definitely ours. The next morning, I go to pick up my phone and text her and say, these hours were ready to go. I didn't even have to text her. She had texted me after all these months and said, hey, I just want to let you know, he's had another broken referral and is available again. And so I said, awesome, these hours, let's go, let's do this. And so when you, with Currie, right off the bat, when you do your referral, it's $30,000. That's not including the 2 trips and all the other stuff, which, side note of birth choice, we will not do international, it's only domestic, but there's a sliding scale based on the previous year's adjusted gross income, 15% of that. And so there's a minimum and a maximum. And that's another way that churches will be able to be involved, is they can give directly to those families and or to the ministry. But anyway, so we do the referral, and I'll be honest, I mean, it took a lot of faith, but God gave everything that was needed for that. And so after we accepted that referral, I felt like I knew why my oldest child had epilepsy. And so I began praying that God heal her completely. And you can have epilepsy and go have EEGs and it not show anything on there. Well, when she would go, and they wanted, even with her, they wanted to give her a more serious diagnosis, but it was like God was holding it back. And to me, that was encouragement. I knew God had a purpose in it. And so when she would go have her EEGs every year, when she would go to sleep is when her brain would go into storm mode. And so it wasn't part of her brain, it was her entire brain would go into storm mode when she would go to sleep. And so God protected her. The diagnosis they wanted to give her, what they should have seen on the outside is she shouldn't have been able to remember anything, and she should have regressed. And the encouragement was God gave her a unique ability to remember, and right now she's a junior at University of Arkansas and has taken the LSAT 3 times and going to law school and just killing it. So she actually has an internship this summer with U.S. Senator Tom Cotton. He's very pro-life, but anyway, gosh, it's so good. But so I just began praying that she'd be healed, because I felt like, okay, we've got access to these doctors, and once you have that referral, because we had access to these doctors, they would start overseeing his case. And so Audrey had her year appointment like 2 months after we accepted the referral. And the day before her appointment, and I had been asking people to pray that she'd be healed, the day before I get a phone call from a social worker and said, hey, they just did a full workup in Currie. I'm sending you the whole file, it's EEG and everything. And I was like, perfect, we're going to Vanderbilt tomorrow. And so we go up there, and when her doctor was not a believer, they did her EEG, and she went from what was normally an entire storm in her brain to absolutely nothing when she went to sleep, and God healed her. And they began to down titrate all the medication, and she went back again and had testing after she was off, and she was healed. And so went and sat with the doctor after they did the testing, and he was like, wow, this is remarkable. And I was like, yeah, I know. I said, and this is why. And so handed him the file, and he immediately, wrapped up hers and started Clay's and started overseeing his case until he came home. And then when he came home, we came home with this massive bag of medication and couldn't talk. I mean, he was cognitively delayed and a lot of things, but the other thing too is he was extremely aggressive. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Risperdal, but he was placed on Risperdal at the age of 2 and upped the dose by 2.5. And when we went to Vanderbilt and we had his whole medical file, they have good medicine in Korea. His whole medical file, this big bag of medicine, it looks like a big bag of cocaine, and my son, and they go through all the testing, and they're like, first of all, they're like, this is 2 different people. What we see here with him and what we see in this file and what they've ever seen is 2 different people. God, and this was not, the diagnosis was infantile spasms. It's not a diagnosis that you are supposed to get cured from. God healed him. And the second thing was, they said if these doctors were in America, we'd pull their license, because instead of what he needed. He was drugged, and so that medicine was to control him, and so he began to down titrate all the 3 medications he was on, and so we started a ton of therapies after that: cognitive, fine motor, gross motor speech. He couldn't speak at all; like he could not form a word or a sound or anything. And then within a year and a half of very intensive therapy, he never shuts up. Like, to this day, he does not shut up. And we're thinking, my girls will be in the car trying to listen to music. They're like, "Oh my goodness, just please let us listen to our songs." But I'm thankful. We had years of, we just worked so hard, and he got to a certain point where the doctors or the therapist said, "Well, we're going to recommend that he go into special ed when he goes to school." And I said, "We're not doing special ed. God's performed miracles." And as a side note with that, Dr. Owens was our pediatrician, and he was like, "Lisa, I've had 2 kids with this diagnosis in my whole career, and they were vegetables." But so we get to this point, I'm like, we're not going into special ed. And we keep working, and he goes into kindergarten. We were homeschooling at this time. But going into kindergarten, I placed him in kindergarten. And by the end of the year, they now do standardized testing in kindergarten. She didn't know any of our story, and the lady over that testing came up to me and said, "I just want you to know that Clay was not at the top of the testing. He was the top. Over every kindergarten class, he was the top." And so I was like, God, and she didn't know the story. Like, she didn't even have to come tell me that. But it was just proof that God does nothing halfway, and he just waits, ready to do miracles. And I think oftentimes in first world countries, we don't see the miracles that people may see in third world countries because we may not be as desperate. But God showed out, and not that there are not challenges with him now, but when I start thinking and seeing struggles now, which pale in comparison to that, I just have to remember that he's God's, and there's no way God does not have something for him, for sure. And even my daughter that's looking forward to starting law school, I'm like, God gave you that for a reason, and God allowed you to go through that for someone else, and so don't waste it. But with my adoptive parents, when I was 15, my dad that had the best dad. I was placed with them at 9 months. They adopted me at 2, and so at 15 is when, or I'll come back to the January 20th. January 20th, I started the job at Birth Choice. 33 years before that, on January 20th, 1992, it was the last time I saw my dad. And so, God's in all the details. The very next day, he gets up and goes to work and has a massive heart attack, and he's gone like that. And so, he didn't suffer. It's the best way to go. But man, that was hard for a 15-year-old. He was like both parents. And so, when you're adopted, God can wear you out with sensitivity to rejection. And so, that, along with when God takes someone out of something, he does it so that things can be fulfilled that wouldn't have been fulfilled had they stayed there. But then also when he takes them out, he'll try to still kill and destroy them with the same things that would have still killed and destroyed it had they stayed in that. And so it's, such a spiritual battle. But I'm 15 and I feel like I've lost both parents. And it's even worse because, the enemy's just wearing me out. Like, I've gone through 2 sets of parents and I don't have anybody. And so it was hard, and it just started a period of years that were so very hard. Several years. And in high school, so many people wouldn't have known. In high school I was cheerleader. I was, involved in stuff, Miss HHS, all those things. And, you're able to keep things neatly in a box with a ribbon on them for so long, but eventually it's gonna explode and you can't contain it. And it's such an importance to go through all that stuff and understand things and have that healing so God can use it. And oftentimes we're waiting on God to do something, but he's waiting on us to understand and seek that understanding and that healing so that he can use it. And so several years of being alone. And so it was in those years of being alone, so alone, that God brought my attention to those without someone and those that are alone, the orphans, those that need us, the church, to come along and do what we're supposed to do. And so all of that began out of that, and I never would have thought how God would have worked all of this out all these years later. So 33 years to the date. And so, of course, I didn't have to look up what 33 means. And of course, biblically, 33 means promise. Can't make that up. I mean, God's promises. I mean, it doesn't matter time. Time is nothing to God. He's working it out. Just like you said, even when we can't see it, we can't make sense of it. We think we're drowning in whatever's around us. We think there's things that there's no way God's ever going to use those. And it doesn't matter how small the detail or how big it is. God's weaving it together so much. So now I'm in this position where even though I have no clue how to do the adoptions, I could, God will provide that. It's all this heart for this, and it's more than adoptions. It's like God's digging down deep and is really doing so much more with it, because the things that we face with this are tied to so many other lies and, culturally and just so many things. And one of the things that God deposited in my mind after I started the job was the picture of Moses' mother placing him in the basket. And at first I was like, because there's some things we're doing. We're planning for education awareness and for fundraising and things that center around adoption. One of those is going to be a calendar. So you'll look for that, but you get to hear stories from all sides. But so I mean, I'd already thought, Esther, Moses, like people in the Bible, even Jesus' story and what he did for us. We'll use those stories, but I never really thought about the fact that Moses' mother placed him in the basket. Like that's our story of what it takes for a mother to place her child somewhere for that child to have life and have abundant life, and for God to use that child. And so I shared that with Brent. A couple weeks later, Brent came back and he was like, there were crocodiles in that Nile River. Just the fear. I mean, I can't imagine what it took for her to place him in there. But it was certain death or take the risk. And so, and the more I get to the more I read about Moses, and then the more I'm learning about the things that we're fighting in this. It's, Moses, it was at a time where it was around slavery, seeking their freedom, and, you can have freedom, but if you have freedom here and here, physically freedom doesn't matter. So I'm excited. Everything it's doing, just God has blown my mind in all of it.
Stay there just a second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do. Isn't it crazy that we get to be part of this story? I mean, it is crazy. That was just, we were here last Tuesday, and I did know they were going to announce that Thursday. And it was all I could do to keep from telling y'all. What the secret is. I was just, because y'all were sitting at those tables where they were going to announce that this is coming to Jackson, and just the depth of this story of how, what God has done. So I would like now to open it up if you